She was hammering nails into rotted timber with bleeding hands. Her dead husband's brother watched from the ridge, silent as stone. Early winter, Montana Territory, 1881. The cold came early that year, sweeping down from the mountains like a predator stalking wounded prey. The sky hung low and gray, heavy with the promise of snow that would not wait much longer. Wind tore across the open grassland, bending the sparse vegetation flat against the frozen earth, carrying with it the sharp bite of ice and the scent of coming storms. Noshi sat motionless on his paint horse atop the rocky ridge, a dark silhouette against the pale expanse of sky. His long black hair whipped around his shoulders, loose strands catching in the wind. He wore a heavy elk-hide coat, beaded along the collar in the traditional style of his mother's people, the Cheyenne. His hands rested easy on the reins, but his jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the valley below. 10 months. 10 long months since he had ridden away from this place, unable to bear the weight of what had happened. He had drifted through trading posts and winter camps, taking work where he could find it, trapping in the high country, guiding wagon trains through the mountain passes. Anything to keep moving. Anything to outrun the memory of his brother's face in those final moments. But distance had solved nothing. And now the first snows were coming, and he was back below him. In the shallow depression where Crow Creek once ran full but now trickled thin and cold, Hazel Crowley worked alone. She was a small figure against the vast emptiness of the land, dressed in a threadbare gray dress that had seen better years, sleeves rolled up despite the biting cold. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back in a loose braid, strands escaping to whip across her face. Even from this distance, Noshi could see the tremor in her hands. She was building something. Or trying to. A structure that could barely be called a shack, pieced together from scraps of wood that looked like they had been salvaged from a dozen different sources. Warped planks, split boards, pieces of an old wagon bed, fragments of what might have once been a fence. The wood was gray with age and weather, some pieces so rotted they crumbled at the edges. She hammered at them with desperate determination. Each strike of the hammer uneven, some nails bending, others missing their mark entirely. Noshi watched as she positioned a board across 2 vertical posts, trying to create some semblance of a wall. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the nail steady. The hammer came down, struck her thumb instead of the nail head. She jerked back, dropping the hammer, cradling her hand against her chest. But she did not cry out, did not stop. After a moment, she picked up the hammer again and resumed her work. The structure leaned dangerously to one side, threatening to collapse with the next strong gust. There was no foundation, just raw earth. No proper corners, no level frame. It was the kind of shelter that would kill someone in a Montana winter, and winter was already knocking at the door. Noshi's horse shifted beneath him, sensing his tension. He laid a calming hand on the animal's neck, but did not look away from the woman below. His throat felt tight. His chest ached with something he could not name. Guilt, shame, grief, all of it twisted together, until he could not tell where one ended and another began. Matthew had been his younger brother by 3 years. Half-brother, if anyone wanted to be precise about it, though neither of them had ever used that word. Their father, a fur trader named William Crowley, had married Noshi's mother, a Cheyenne woman named Morning Dove, when Noshi was just a boy. When she died of fever, William had remarried, this time to a white woman from St. Louis, who gave him Matthew. The brothers had grown up together, hunted together, worked the trap lines together. Matthew had never treated Noshi as less than full blood, never made him feel the weight of being caught between 2 worlds. And Noshi had gotten him killed. The memory came unbidden, sharp as a knife blade. They had been hunting elk in the high country last spring, tracking a bull through dense timber. Noshi had insisted on taking the narrow ridge trail, certain it would save them half a day. Matthew had hesitated, said the snowpack looked unstable, said they should go around. But Noshi had been impatient, eager to get back before dark, and he had pushed forward. The avalanche had come without warning. One moment they were riding single file along the ridge. The next the world was sliding away beneath them in a roar of white. Noshi's horse had been closer to solid ground and had lunged free. Matthews had not been so lucky. Noshi could still hear his brother's shout, cut short as the snow took him. They had found Matthews' body 2 days later after the snow settled. His neck had been broken in the fall, death likely instant. That was what people said, trying to offer comfort. He did not suffer. He did not feel pain. But Noshi felt it. Felt it every waking moment since he had not stayed for the burial. Could not bear to stand beside Hazel and accept her grief when he was the cause of it. Could not look into her eyes and see the accusation he deserved. So he had ridden out the night before the funeral, left her alone to bury the man they had both loved, and told himself it was for the best now. Watching her struggle in the cold with bleeding hands and rotted wood, he knew he had been a coward. A gust of wind screamed down from the mountains, hitting the valley like a fist. The partial wall Hazel had been constructing shuddered violently. She threw herself against it, trying to hold it upright, her whole body pressed against the boards. Her boots slipped in the loose dirt. The wood groaned, nails shrieking as they bent and pulled free. Noshi's hands tightened on the reins. His horse danced sideways, sensing his urge to move, but he held himself still. She would not want his help. She had every right to spit in his face and tell him to leave. He had abandoned her when she needed someone most. The wind eased. The wall held barely. Hazel stepped back, breathing hard, and surveyed her work. Even from the ridge, Noshi could see the defeat in the slope of her shoulders, the way her head dropped forward. She stood there for a long moment, hands hanging at her sides, and for a terrible instant, Noshi thought she might just give up. Sit down in the dirt and let the cold take her, but then she moved. Bent down, picked up another piece of scrap wood, and went back to work. That was when Noshi finally moved. He could not watch anymore. Could not sit on that ridge like a ghost while she broke herself trying to survive. He turned his horse and rode down the backside of the ridge, taking the long way around through the cottonwood grove so she would not see him coming. Not yet. He needed a moment to think, to figure out what he would say when she finally looked at him. The old Crowley homestead sat a mile west, abandoned since Matthew's death. It had been their father's place, built solid with good timber, back when there was still money in furs. Noshi had not set foot inside since the day he left, but he knew what would be there. Matthew had always kept supplies on hand, stored against lean times, wood, tools, food, if the mice had not gotten to it. Things Hazel desperately needed, but either did not know about or could not bring herself to take. Noshi dismounted near the barn, which still stood despite months of neglect. The door hung crooked on its hinges, but the interior was dry. Inside, just as he remembered, were stacks of milled lumber Matthew had bought the previous fall, planning to build an addition to the house come spring. Good pine boards, straight and clean. A box of nails, barely touched. A proper crosscut saw. A sledgehammer with a solid handle. Noshi stood in the dim barn, surrounded by his dead brother's unfinished plans, and felt the weight of it all pressing down on him like stones. Matthew had been building a future, had talked about expanding the house, about the children he and Hazel would have, about the life they would make together. And Noshi had ended all of that in one careless decision on a mountain ridge. He loaded the lumber onto his horse, working methodically, tying it down with practiced knots. The tools went into his saddlebags. He found a wool blanket in the tack room, still smelling faintly of cedar, and rolled it tight. As he worked, he tried to prepare himself for what would come next. Hazel's anger, her tears, her hatred, which he deserved. When everything was loaded, he mounted again and rode toward the creek. The sun was lower now, the shadows growing long. The temperature was dropping fast. By nightfall, it would be well below freezing, and Hazel's pitiful shelter would offer no protection at all. He approached from the south this time, making no effort to hide his presence. The sound of hoofbeats carried across the open ground. Hazel was kneeling near her stack of scrap wood, trying to sort through the pieces for something usable. She looked up sharply at the sound, one hand going instinctively to the knife at her belt. Their eyes met across the distance, and no, she saw the recognition hit her like a physical blow. Her face went white. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. For a long moment they simply stared at each other, the wind howling between them. And no, she saw everything he had feared in her expression: shock, pain, and beneath it all, a terrible hollow grief. He dismounted slowly, keeping his movements careful and non-threatening. His boots hit the ground with a soft thud. He stood there, one hand still on the saddle, and for the first time in 10 months, he found his voice. "You should not be out here alone," he said. His voice was rough from disuse, the words coming out harder than he intended. Hazel rose to her feet slowly, like someone in a dream. Or a nightmare. Her hands were clenched at her sides, bloody and raw. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You left." 2 words. That was all. But they carried the weight of every day she had spent alone. Every night she had cried herself to sleep. Every moment she had needed someone and found only emptiness. "I know," no, she said. There was no defense he could offer, no excuse that would matter. "I should not have, you left me," Hazel said again, louder this time. Her voice cracked. "I buried him alone. I stood beside his grave, and there was no one. No one, no, she. Everyone else had someone, but I had no one." The words hit him like blows, each one deserved. He took them without flinching, without trying to defend himself. She had earned the right to every accusation, every ounce of anger. "I was afraid," he said quietly. "Afraid to face you. Afraid of what you would see when you looked at me." "And what should I see?" Hazel demanded. Tears were streaming down her face now, but her voice was steady, strong. "You think I blame you? You think I spent these months hating you?" No, she said nothing. That was exactly what he had thought. What he had told himself to justify running away. "I needed you," Hazel said, and the pain in her voice was unbearable. "Matthew loved you. You were his brother. And I needed you to help me understand how to keep living when he was gone. But you just disappeared, like I did not matter. Like I was not worth staying for." "You mattered," no, she said, stepping forward before he could stop himself. "You matter. I did not leave because of you. I left because I could not stand what I had done. Because every time I thought about facing you, I saw him dying, and I knew it was my fault." Hazel shook her head, wiping roughly at her tears. "The avalanche was not your fault. I chose that trail. I insisted on it when Matthew said it was not safe. I pushed forward when I should have listened. He died because I was too stubborn to hear him. He died because sometimes the mountain takes people," Hazel said fiercely. "It was not your fault, Noshi. It was never your fault." The words should have brought comfort, but they only made the guilt cut deeper. Noshi looked away, unable to hold her gaze. "You cannot know that. I know Matthew would not want you carrying this," Hazel said. Her voice softened, losing some of its edge. "He would not want you punishing yourself. And he would not want me out here freezing to death, because I am too proud to ask for help." Noshi looked at her then, really looked. At the hollows under her eyes, the thinness of her frame beneath the worn dress, the way she swayed slightly on her feet as if standing took more strength than she had left. She was not just grieving. She was starving, exhausted, barely holding on. "Why are you building this?" he asked, gesturing to the leaning structure behind her. "The house is gone," Hazel said flatly. "Burned down 6 weeks ago. Lightning strike. I tried to save what I could, but there was nothing left worth saving. Noshi felt his chest tighten. Where have you been staying? Here, under a canvas tarp when it rains. Under the stars when it does not. Hazel. I had nowhere else to go, she said, and the defeat in her voice was devastating. No family. No money. The neighbors think I am cursed. Bad luck. First my husband dies, then my house burns. They cross the street when they see me in town. So I came back here, to the only place I ever felt like I belonged. And I have been trying to build something, anything, just enough to survive the winter. Noshi moved then, crossing the distance between them in 3 long strides. He reached for her hands, and she did not pull away. Her fingers were ice cold, the skin torn and blistered from the hammer, blood dried dark beneath broken nails. He turned her hands over gently, examining the damage, and felt something crack open inside his chest. Enough, he said quietly. No more of this. Hazel's eyes met his, searching. What? I am going to help you build a real shelter. With proper wood and proper tools. Something that will keep you alive through the winter. Noshi, I cannot ask you to. You are not asking. I am telling you. I failed you once. I will not fail you again. For a long moment, Hazel just stared at him. Then slowly she nodded. Her shoulders sagged with relief so profound it was almost painful to witness. Okay, she whispered. Okay. Noshi released her hands carefully and turned to his horse. He began untying the lumber, stacking it on the ground in neat piles. Hazel watched in silence, her arms wrapped around herself against the cold. When he pulled out the wool blanket and held it out to her, she took it without protest, wrapping it around her shoulders like armor. We will start with the foundation, Noshi said, his voice taking on the steady, practical tone of someone used to solving problems. Level the ground, set proper corner posts. Then we frame the walls and get a roof on before the snow comes. 2 days, maybe 3 if we work steady. There's a storm coming, Hazel said, looking at the northern sky where dark clouds were massing. I can feel it. Then we work fast, Noshi said simply. He picked up the sledgehammer and the first post. Show me where you want the door to face. Hazel pointed toward the east, away from the prevailing winds. Noshi nodded and began marking out the corners, using a length of rope to measure straight lines. Hazel watched for a moment, then quietly picked up a shovel from her pathetic pile of tools, and began clearing the ground where he indicated. They worked in silence as the sun sank lower and the wind grew colder. There was too much to say, and no words adequate to say it. So instead they built. Noshi drove posts deep into the frozen ground while Hazel leveled the dirt and cleared away rocks. When the first corner was set, they moved to the second, then the third. Working with the efficiency of people who had run out of time for anything but survival. As darkness fell and the first snowflakes began to drift down from the heavy sky, they had the foundation laid and the corner posts set. It was not much, but it was solid, real, the beginning of something that might actually stand. Noshi built a fire as Hazel huddled beneath the blanket. Her eyes fixed on the small flames as if they held answers to questions she did not know how to ask. He pulled dried meat and hardtack from his saddlebags, food he had brought from the trading post, and handed her a share. She ate slowly, mechanically, like someone who had forgotten what hunger felt like because it had become constant. When the food was gone and the fire burned low, Noshi finally spoke. I am sorry I was not here. Hazel looked at him across the flames. In the firelight, her face looked younger, softer, but also infinitely tired. I am sorry you felt like you had to run. Matthew asked me to take care of you, Noshi said. Before he died. In the moments after the snow stopped and before he stopped breathing. He made me promise. Hazel's breath caught. He did? He said you were strong, but you should not have to be strong alone. He made me swear I would look after you if anything happened to him." A tear slid down Hazel's cheek, catching the firelight. "Then why did you leave?" "Because I thought I would only make things worse," Noshi said. "I thought you deserved better than the man who got your husband killed." "I deserved a friend," Hazel said softly. "I deserve not to be abandoned." "I know," Noshi said. "And I am here now. If you will let me be." Hazel pulled the blanket tighter and looked up at the sky, where snow was beginning to fall in earnest, white flakes swirling in the darkness. "Stay," she said finally. "At least until the shelter is finished. After that, we will see." It was not forgiveness, but it was a beginning. The snow fell through the night, soft and steady, blanketing the valley in white silence. Noshi woke before dawn to find a thin layer of frost coating his blanket and ice crystals forming in his hair. The fire had died to embers, glowing faintly in the prey-dawn darkness. He sat up carefully, joints stiff from the cold and from sleeping on frozen ground. Across the dying fire, Hazel still slept, curled tight beneath the wool blanket he had given her. Even in sleep, she looked tense, her face drawn, one hand clutched near her throat as if protecting something precious. Noshi watched her for a moment, feeling the familiar weight of guilt settle over him like a second skin. She had grown thinner since Matthew's death, her cheekbones sharp, her wrists fragile as bird bones. The months alone had carved away everything soft, leaving only sinew and will. He rose quietly and began rebuilding the fire, adding kindling first, then larger pieces of wood he had gathered the night before. The flames caught quickly, crackling to life, and warmth began to spread in a small circle around the pit. The sky to the east was just beginning to lighten, a pale gray line separating earth from heaven. The storm had passed, but more clouds loomed on the horizon, dark and heavy with the promise of worse to come. Hazel stirred as the fire grew, her eyes opening slowly. For a moment she looked confused, disoriented, as if she had forgotten where she was. Then her gaze found Noshi, and memory returned. She sat up stiffly, pushing hair back from her face with hands that still trembled slightly. "Morning," Noshi said, keeping his voice low and even. He poured water from his canteen into a battered tin pot and set it near the flames to heat. "Storm passed. We have good light for working." Hazel nodded but did not speak. She pulled the blanket around her shoulders and moved closer to the fire, holding her damaged hands toward the warmth. In the growing daylight, Noshi could see the full extent of the injuries. Deep bruises purpled her knuckles, cuts crisscrossed her palms, and several fingernails were cracked and bleeding. She had been working herself to destruction, one nail at a time, when the water was hot. Noshi pulled a small cloth bundle from his saddlebag and unwrapped it carefully. Inside were strips of clean linen and a tin of salve his mother had taught him to make from pine resin, bear fat, and wild herbs. He had carried it for years, a habit formed in childhood that had saved him from infection more times than he could count. "Let me see your hands," he said. Hazel hesitated, pulling them back instinctively. "They are fine. They are not fine. They are going to get infected if we do not clean them properly." She looked at him for a long moment, some internal debate playing out behind her eyes. Then, slowly she extended her hands toward him. Noshi took them gently, cradling them in his own much larger palms. Her skin was cold despite the fire, the flesh torn and angry red around the worst of the cuts. He worked carefully, using warm water to clean away the dried blood and dirt, then applying the salve with light, practiced touches. Hazel watched in silence, her jaw tight. But she did not pull away even when he touched the deepest cuts, and she could not quite suppress a wince. "Matthew told me once that you learned healing from your mother," Hazel said quietly as Noshi began wrapping her hands in clean linen. "She was a medicine woman among her people," Noshi replied. "She believed that knowing how to heal was as important as knowing how to hunt. Maybe more important. I never met her. Matthew said she died when he was very young. He was 3. too young to remember her clearly. But I was 6. I remember. Hazel was quiet for a moment, watching his face as he worked. What was she like? No, she tied off the bandage on her left hand before answering. Strong, quiet. She had a way of moving through the world that made everything seem calmer, steadier. My father loved her deeply, I think, though he was not a man who spoke of such things. When she died, something in him died too. Is that why he remarried so quickly? Perhaps. Or perhaps he simply could not bear to be alone with his grief. Some people need to fill the empty spaces immediately, before the silence becomes too loud. The words hung between them, and no, she realized he was no longer talking only about his father. He finished wrapping Hazel's right hand and sat back, releasing her carefully. She flexed her fingers experimentally, testing the bandages. "Thank you," she said softly. No, she nodded and turned his attention to the food supplies. He had brought enough for several days, knowing that Hazel likely had little or nothing. He pulled out more dried meat, some cornmeal, and a small sack of beans. Not much, but enough to keep them working. He mixed the cornmeal with water and a pinch of salt, forming it into cakes that he set on flat rocks near the fire to cook. They ate in silence as the sun finally broke over the eastern ridge, flooding the valley with pale winter light. The snow from the night before had left only a thin coating, not enough to stop their work, but enough to make everything harder. The ground would be frozen now, solid as iron, which would make setting the remaining posts a brutal task. When the meal was finished, she stood and surveyed the work ahead. The 4 corner posts were set, but they needed crossbeams to connect them, floor joists to keep the structure stable, and then the walls themselves. After that would come the roof, the most critical piece. Without a solid roof, the rest was meaningless. "We start with the frame," he said, moving toward the stacked lumber. "Once the skeleton is strong, everything else will follow." Hazel rose and joined him, her bandaged hands already reaching for tools, despite the obvious pain it caused. She caught her wrist gently. "You measure and mark," he said. "I will do the heavy lifting and hammering. Your hands need time to heal." He expected an argument, but Hazel simply nodded and picked up the measuring rope instead. They fell into a rhythm quickly, she cutting lumber to length while Hazel marked the measurements, her mathematical precision evident in every mark she made. She had a good eye for angles and balance, better than his own, and he found himself deferring to her judgment more than once. As the morning wore on, the structure began to take shape. The cross beams went up first, connecting the corner posts and creating the basic rectangular frame. Then came the floor joists, spaced evenly to support the weight of whoever would live here. She worked steadily, methodically, his movements efficient from years of building and repairing structures in harsh country. Sweat dampened his shirt despite the cold, his breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. Hazel watched and learned, asking occasional questions about technique, about why he chose to join pieces one way rather than another. She answered patiently, surprised by her genuine interest. Most people saw building as brutal necessity, but Hazel approached it like a puzzle to be solved, a skill to be mastered. By midday, they had the basic frame complete. It stood solid and square, the posts driven deep enough to withstand strong winds, the beams properly braced and secured. It was real now, no longer just scattered lumber, but the bones of an actual shelter. They stopped to eat again, sharing the last of the cornmeal cakes and some water from the creek. The temperature had risen slightly with the sun, but it was still bitterly cold, the kind of cold that worked its way into bones and stayed there. She noticed Hazel shivering despite her proximity to the fire. "There are warmer clothes at the homestead," he said. "Matthew's winter things. They would fit you better than what you are wearing." Hazel's face closed immediately, her expression shuddering like a door slamming. "I do not need his clothes. You need something warmer than that dress. You will freeze before the shelter is finished." I said I do not need them. The sharpness in her voice surprised him. Noshi set down the water skin and looked at her carefully. Why not? Hazel stared into the fire, her jaw working. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. Because if I put on his clothes, if I wrap myself in things that still smell like him, I will fall apart. And I cannot afford to fall apart. Not now. Not until I am safe. The raw honesty of it hit Noshi like a fist to the chest. He understood then that Hazel was holding herself together through sheer force of will. That grief was a luxury she could not yet afford. That every moment of every day was a battle just to keep moving forward. I understand, he said quietly. But when the shelter is finished, when you are safe, you will need to let yourself grieve. Holding it in will only poison you from the inside. I will grieve when I am not fighting to survive, Hazel said flatly. Until then, I keep moving. No, she did not argue.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
He recognized that stubbornness because he saw it in himself every time he looked in still water. They were both running from the same ghost, just in different directions. They returned to work in heavy silence. The walls came next, board by board, nailed to the frame with careful precision. Noshi cut and fit while Hazel held pieces in place, her bandaged hands gripping despite the pain. The structure grew taller, more solid, more real with each passing hour. It was late afternoon when the first visitors arrived. Noshi heard the horses before he saw them, the sound of hooves crunching through frozen grass. He straightened from his work, hand moving instinctively toward the rifle leaning against a nearby post. Hazel heard them too, and her whole body went rigid. 3 riders came into view, approaching from the direction of town. Noshi recognized them immediately. Frank Hutchins, who owned the general store. Carl Brenner, a rancher with land to the south. And Dutch Morrison, a bull of a man who served as the unofficial lawkeeper in these parts. They reined in about 20 feet away, their eyes moving from the half-built structure to Hazel to Noshi and back again. Well now, Frank said, his voice carrying that false friendliness that always preceded judgment. Heard there was building going on out here. Wanted to see it with our own eyes. Noshi said nothing. Just watched them with the same stillness a wolf watches strangers near its den. Hazel stepped forward slightly, her chin lifted. Good afternoon, gentlemen, she said, her voice steady despite the tension Noshi could see in her shoulders. Is there something I can help you with? Dutch leaned forward in his saddle, eyes narrowed. Question is more what you are doing out here, Mrs. Crowley, and who you are doing it with. I am building a shelter, Hazel said evenly. As you can clearly see, with your dead husband's half-breed brother, Carl added, the slur casual and vicious. Mighty convenient how quick you moved on. Noshi felt rage flash hot in his chest, but before he could move or speak, Hazel's voice cut through the air like a blade. Matthew has been dead for 10 months. My house burned 6 weeks ago. I have been sleeping on frozen ground ever since. Noshi returned yesterday and offered to help me build shelter before I freeze to death. If you have a problem with any of that, I suggest you either offer better help or ride back to town and mind your own business. The 3 men exchanged glances, clearly not expecting such directness. Frank cleared his throat uncomfortably. Now, Mrs. Crowley, we are not trying to cause trouble. We are just concerned about your reputation. What people might think, seeing you out here alone with a man. No chaperone, no proper, my reputation, Hazel interrupted, her voice rising with barely controlled fury. Died the day my husband did, and nobody from town lifted a finger to help me. Where was your concern when I was starving? Where was your Christian charity when my house burned and I had nowhere to go? You want to talk about proper? There is nothing proper about leaving a widow to die alone in the winter cold. Dutch's face reddened. Watch your tongue, woman. We came out here as a courtesy. Then consider your courtesy noted and ride on, Hazel said coldly. I have work to do. For a moment, Noshi thought Dutch might dismount and push the issue. The man's hand moved toward the gun at his hip, not threatening exactly, but a reminder that he wore one. Noshi shifted his weight slightly, positioning himself between Dutch and Hazel without making it obvious. His own rifle was still several feet away, but there was a knife in his boot and another at his belt, and he had not forgotten how to use either. The tension stretched taut as a wire. Then Frank spoke up, his voice placating. All right. No need for tempers. Mrs. Crowley, we will leave you to your work. But understand that people in town are talking. Might be wise to think about appearances. I will think about survival, Hazel said. Everything else is secondary. The three men turned their horses and rode away, but not before Dutch cast one last look back at Noshi, his eyes promising that this conversation was not finished. When they were out of sight, Hazel finally let her shoulders sag, the fierce strength draining out of her like water from a cracked vessel. They will be back, she said quietly. Or others like them. They will not let this stand. Let them come, Noshi said, surprising himself with the venom in his voice. We finish the shelter first. Everything else can wait. Hazel turned to look at him, and something in her expression had changed. The wall between them had cracked just slightly, letting through a flicker of trust, of gratitude, of something deeper that neither of them was ready to name. Thank you, she said. For standing with me. Matthew would have stood with you, Noshi said. The least I can do is try to be half the man he was. You are not Matthew, Hazel said, but there was no accusation in it. And maybe that is all right. They returned to work as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. The walls went up faster now, fueled by shared anger and determination. By the time darkness forced them to stop, 3 of the 4 walls were complete, and the 4th was halfway done. The structure stood solid and strong, a defiant statement against the cold and the judgment of small-minded men. That night, as they sat by the fire eating beans cooked in a battered pot, Hazel finally spoke the question that had been hanging between them all day. Why did you really come back, Noshi? And do not tell me it was just to keep a promise to Matthew. I need the truth. Noshi stared into the flames, watching sparks spiral up into the darkness. When he answered, his voice was rough with emotion he had kept buried for too long. Because I saw you from that ridge, struggling alone, and I realized that running away had not made anything better. It had only made me a coward twice over. Once for getting Matthew killed, and once for abandoning you to face the consequences alone. I came back because I could not live with being that man anymore. Hazel was quiet for a long time. Then she reached across the space between them and placed her bandaged hand over his. You did not get Matthew killed, she said firmly. The mountain did. And you are not a coward. A coward would have stayed away. You came back. That takes more strength than you know. Noshi looked down at her hand resting on his. So small and damaged, but still reaching out, still offering grace he did not deserve. His throat tightened with emotion too big for words. I do not know how to make this right, he said finally. Neither do I, Hazel admitted. But maybe we can figure it out together. The fire crackled between them, and overhead the stars emerged one by one, cold and distant and beautiful. Tomorrow they would finish the walls and start on the roof. Tomorrow the town might send more people to judge and condemn. Tomorrow the next storm might arrive. But tonight, for the first time in 10 long months, neither of them was facing the darkness alone, and that, Noshi thought as he finally let himself meet Hazel's eyes across the firelight, was something worth building on. Dawn broke cold and clear. The sky a brilliant pale blue that promised no mercy from the elements. Noshi woke to find frost coating everything in sight, transforming the valley into a landscape of silver and white. His breath hung in the air like smoke as he stirred the fire back to life, coaxing reluctant flames from the overnight coals. Hazel emerged from beneath her blanket, looking somehow both better and worse than the day before. The bandages on her hands were still clean, the wounds beginning their slow process of healing, but new shadows had formed beneath her eyes. She had not slept well, that much was obvious. The confrontation with the men from town had shaken something loose inside her. Fears she had been trying to ignore now demanding attention. "We need to finish today," she said without preamble, moving to stand beside the fire. Her voice was tight with urgency. "The roof needs to be on before nightfall." Noshi glanced at the sky, reading the signs written there. The clear morning was deceptive. Far to the north, barely visible on the horizon, a dark line of clouds sat like a bruise. Another storm, bigger than the last, gathering strength before it swept south. 2 days away, maybe less if the winds shifted. "We will finish," he said with more confidence than he felt. Building a proper roof in a single day was ambitious even with a full crew. With just the two of them, one injured, it bordered on impossible. But impossible had never stopped either of them before. They worked through breakfast, eating cold cornmeal cakes while Noshi explained the roof structure. He sketched it in the dirt with a stick, showing how the rafters would angle up to meet at a center ridge beam. How they would overlap and lock together. How the whole thing would be covered with split shingles and sealed with pine pitch to keep out the snow and rain. "I have never built a roof," Hazel admitted, studying his drawing with fierce concentration. "You have never built anything before yesterday," Noshi pointed out. "But you learn fast." They started with the ridge beam, the long central piece that would run the length of the structure and support everything else. It required 2 people to lift and position, and even with both of them straining, it was a brutal task. Noshi climbed onto the wall frame, balancing precariously on the narrow top board, while Hazel guided the beam up from below. His muscles screamed with the effort of holding the weight while he secured it with temporary bracing. The first rafter went up easier than expected. Noshi had cut the angle precisely, and it fit against the ridge beam like it had been born there. He hammered it into place while Hazel held it steady from below, her bandaged hands gripping despite the pain he knew she must be feeling. The second rafter matched the first, creating a satisfying symmetry. By mid-morning, they had established a rhythm. Noshi would cut and fit the rafters while Hazel prepared the next piece, measuring twice and marking carefully. Each rafter had to be identical, the angles exact, or the whole roof would sit crooked and leak. It was exacting work that demanded total focus, leaving no room for the thoughts that had haunted them both through the long night. They were halfway through when Noshi noticed the change in Hazel. She had grown quiet, her movements mechanical, her eyes distant. He watched her measure the same board 3 times, each time coming up with a different number. Her hands were shaking again, but not from cold or pain. From something deeper. "Hazel," he said gently, climbing down from the roof frame. "Take a rest." "We do not have time for rest," she said, her voice strained. The storm will wait another hour. "You will not do good work if you are exhausted." She started to protest, then seemed to deflate all at once. The measuring rope slipped from her fingers, and she sank down onto a stack of lumber, her face in her hands. For a moment Noshi thought she might be crying, but when she looked up her eyes were dry. "Just infinitely tired. I keep seeing them," she said quietly. "Frank and Dutch and Carl, the way they looked at me. Like I was something dirty. Something shameful." Noshi sat down beside her, careful to leave space between them. "Their judgment says nothing about you and everything about them, but they speak for the whole town," Hazel said. "You saw how they looked at us. At you." That word Carl used. "I have heard worse," Noshi said evenly. "Words only have the power we give them. Easy to say when you can just leave," Hazel said, and there was an edge to her voice now. "You can ride away tomorrow and never see those men again. But I have to live here. This is the only place I have." The words hit harder than she probably intended. Noshi felt them land like stones in his chest, felt the truth of them settle into his bones. She was right. He had the freedom to leave, to drift, to disappear when things became too difficult. Hazel had no such luxury. This valley, this tiny community of judgmental strangers, was all she had. Then we make them see you differently, he said finally. How? By living like a nun? By never speaking to another man for the rest of my life? By wearing black and weeping prettily so they know I am properly mourning? By building something so solid they cannot ignore it? No, she said, gesturing to the shelter rising around them. By surviving when they expected you to fail? By refusing to be ashamed of accepting help when you needed it? Hazel looked at the structure, at the strong walls and the half-finished roof, and something in her expression softened. Matthew would have liked this, she said quietly. He always talked about building something permanent, something that would last beyond us. Tell me about him, no, she said. Not about his death. About his life. The parts I missed while I was away. Hazel was quiet for a long moment, staring at the mountains. When she spoke, her voice was distant, traveling back through memory to happier times. He wanted children, she said. 3 at least, maybe 4. He had names picked out. Samuel for a boy, after his grandfather. Rose for a girl, because he said roses were beautiful but tough enough to survive Montana winters. No, she felt his throat tighten, but said nothing, letting her talk. He was learning to read better, Hazel continued. He would sit by the fire every night with this old book of poetry someone had left at the trading post. He would sound out the words so carefully, so seriously, like each one was a puzzle to solve. He wanted to be able to read to our children someday. I did not know that, no, she said softly. There was a lot you did not know, Hazel said, but there was no accusation in it. Just sadness. You were always gone, off trapping or trading or whatever it was that kept you away. Matthew missed you. He would say sometimes that he felt like he had to be 2 brothers, himself and you, because you were never there. The words were gentle but they cut deep. No, she had known he was often absent, but he had told himself it was necessary, that someone had to bring in money, that Matthew understood. Now he wondered if his brother had simply been too kind to complain. I am sorry, he said. I should have been here more. Yes, Hazel agreed simply. You should have. But you are here now. Maybe that is what matters. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of the past settling between them like snow. Then Hazel stood, brushing off her skirt with determination. We should keep working, she said. The roof will not build itself. They returned to their task with renewed focus. The remaining rafters went up one by one, each adding to the growing skeleton of the roof. By early afternoon, the basic structure was complete, a strong triangular framework that would shed snow and rain efficiently. Now came the harder part, covering it. Noshi had brought split shingles from the homestead, thin pieces of cedar that would overlap like scales on a fish. They had to be laid in precise rows, starting from the bottom and working up, each layer covering the nails of the layer below. It was tedious work that required patience and a steady hand. Hazel proved surprisingly adept at it. Her smaller hands could manipulate the shingles more easily than Noshi's, and her eye for alignment was better. She worked methodically, placing each piece exactly right before allowing Noshi to nail it down. The roof began to take shape, row by careful row, a protective shell against the elements. They were 3/4 finished when Noshi heard the sound that made his blood run cold. Hoofbeats, multiple horses, moving fast. He straightened on the roof, shading his eyes against the afternoon sun, and counted 6 riders approaching from the direction of town. Hazel, he said quietly, his voice carrying a warning. She heard the tone and looked up immediately. Her face went pale when she saw the riders. That is more than just a social call. Noshi climbed down from the roof quickly, landing hard and moving immediately to where his rifle leaned against the wall. He did not pick it up, not yet, but he wanted it within reach. Hazel moved to stand beside him, her spine straight. Her chin lifted in defiance, even as he could see fear flickering in her eyes. The riders formed a loose semicircle around the shelter, keeping their distance but boxing them in. Noshi recognized Dutch Morrison immediately, and Frank Hutchins. The other four were ranchers and townsmen, all wearing expressions of grim determination. "They had not come to talk, Mrs. Crowley," Dutch said, his voice carrying the false authority of a man who enjoyed wielding power over those weaker than himself. "We have come to discuss your situation." "I have no situation to discuss," Hazel said coldly. "I am building a home on land that belongs to me." "That is all, land that belonged to your husband," Carl Brenner corrected. "Which makes it complicated now that you are keeping company with another man." "Noshi is my brother-in-law," Hazel said. "He is helping me build shelter." "There's nothing complicated about that. Brother-in-law by marriage to a dead man," Dutch said. "Which means he is nothing to you now. Just a drifter. A half-breed with no claim and no rights." Noshi felt rage building in his chest like a fire, but he forced himself to remain still, to keep his hands away from the rifle. Violence now would only prove their point, would give them the excuse they were looking for. "He has the right of any human being to help another in need," Hazel said, her voice shaking with barely controlled fury. "Which is more than any of you have done." "We are trying to protect you," Frank said, attempting a softer approach. "A woman alone with a man, no proper chaperone. People are talking." "Your reputation." "My reputation is my concern," Hazel snapped. "Not yours. It becomes our concern when it affects the whole community," Dutch said. "We have standards, decency. We cannot have a widow living in sin with a savage. That was too much." Noshi took one step forward, his hand moving toward his rifle. But Hazel's voice stopped him. "Touch that gun and they win," she said quietly, urgently. Then louder, to the men, "You want to talk about decency? Where was your decency when I was starving? Where were your Christian values when my house burned and I had nowhere to go? You left me to die, all of you, and now you dare to judge me for accepting help from the one person who had the courage to come back." "Your husband has been dead less than a year," Dutch said, his voice hardening. "And already you are building a home with another man. That is not grief. That is something else entirely." "How dare you," Hazel said, her voice dropping to something dangerous. "You did not know Matthew. You did not see me bury him alone because his brother was too broken by grief to stand beside me. You know nothing about my pain or my choices." "We know enough," Carl said. "And we are telling you now, for your own good, send the Indian away. If you need help building, we will send proper men. White men. Christians, no," Hazel said flatly. The word hung in the air like a challenge. The men exchanged glances, clearly not expecting such direct refusal. Dutch's hand moved to his gun, not drawing it but making its presence known. "You would be wise to reconsider," he said slowly. "Are you threatening me?" Hazel asked, her voice steady despite the fear Noshi could see in the tension of her shoulders. "We are warning you," Dutch said. "There are consequences for defying community standards. Your husband's land could be contested. Your right to stay here questioned. You are a woman alone with no male relatives to speak for you. You exist here by our good graces. Matthew left this land to me," Hazel said. "Legal and binding. You cannot take it. Legal documents can be challenged," Frank said, his voice oily with false sympathy. "Especially when there are concerns about a widow's mental state. Grief can make people do irrational things. Take up with inappropriate companions." Understanding dawned in Hazel's eyes, and Noshi saw her face go white. They were threatening to have her declared incompetent, to strip her of everything on the grounds that she was not of sound mind. It was a tactic used against women before, a legal fiction that gave men power over property and lives. "You would not dare," she whispered. "We would prefer not to," Dutch said. But if you force our hand, we will do what is necessary to maintain order and decency. Send the Indian away, Mrs. Crowley. Today, or face the consequences. No, she had heard enough. He stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Hazel, his body language making his position clear. I will leave when Hazel tells me to leave, he said. His voice quiet but carrying the kind of certainty that came from being willing to die for a principle. Not before. This does not concern you, Breed. Dutch spat. It concerns me because you are threatening someone under my protection, no, she said. And I do not care what color your skin is or what power you think you have. Touch her, threaten her land, try to harm her in any way, and I will make you regret it. The threat was clear and unmistakable. Several of the men reached for their guns, but Dutch held up a hand, stopping them. He studied Noshi with cold calculation, reassessing the situation. You would start a war over this? He asked. I would finish one, Noshi replied. For a long moment, the tableau held. Tension stretched so tight it hummed like a wire in Thuend. Then Dutch smiled, but it was the smile of a snake, cold and venomous. Very well, he said. But understand this. You have made a choice today, Mrs. Crowley. You have chosen this man over your community, over decency, over any future you might have had here. When winter comes and you are starving, do not come to us for help. When you need supplies and no one will sell to you, remember this moment. You have cast your lot with a savage. Live with the consequences. He wheeled his horse, and the others followed, riding away in a cloud of dust and implied violence. They disappeared over the ridge, but Noshi knew they would be back. Men like Dutch Morrison did not accept defiance easily. When they were gone, Hazel finally let herself tremble. She sank down onto the ground, her legs simply giving out, and wrapped her arms around herself. Noshi knelt beside her, not touching but close. They will make good on those threats, she said, her voice hollow. They will make sure no one trades with me. No one will help. I will be completely alone. You will not be alone, Noshi said firmly. I can hunt. I can trap. I know which plants are safe to eat, how to preserve meat, how to survive winters harder than this. We do not need their stores or their charity. We, Hazel repeated, looking at him with something like wonder. You keep saying we. Yes, Noshi said simply. If you will have me, I am not leaving. Not this time. Hazel stared at him, tears finally spilling down her cheeks, and slowly she nodded. Then we finish the roof, she said, her voice stronger now. And we show them that we do not need their approval to survive. They worked through the afternoon with fierce determination, driven by anger and defiance and something deeper neither was ready to name. The final rows of shingles went up as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. Noshi sealed the edges with pine pitch, making them weatherproof. Hazel fitted the last pieces around the chimney hole they had left for a future stove. As darkness fell, they hammered the final nail. The shelter was complete. 4 solid walls, a strong roof, a doorframe ready for a door. It was small, barely large enough for one person, let alone 2. But it was real, and it was theirs, and it would keep them alive through the winter. They stood back together, looking at what they had built in just 3 days. Noshi felt something shift in his chest, some weight he had been carrying beginning to ease. This was more than just a shelter. It was proof that broken things could be rebuilt. That 2 people carrying impossible grief could still create something worth protecting. Matthew would be proud, Hazel said softly, her hand finding Noshi's in the darkness. Of both of us. Noshi squeezed her hand gently, carefully, mindful of her healing wounds. I hope so, he said. I hope wherever he is, he knows we are trying. They stood there as the first stars emerged, their hands clasped. And for the first time since Matthew's death, Noshi allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, survival was not the same as giving up. Maybe building something new did not mean forgetting what was lost. Maybe there was room in a grieving heart for hope. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The town would make good on its threats. Winter would come in earnest, harsh and unforgiving. But tonight they had shelter, and they had each other. And in the vast darkness of the Montana Territory, that was enough. The first true blizzard hit 3 days after the shelter was completed. It came howling down from the mountains like a living thing, all teeth and fury, turning the world white in minutes. Noshi had seen it building on the northern horizon and had spent the previous day preparing.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story.
Gathering firewood, securing loose boards. Checking and rechecking every seal in the roof, now. Huddled inside the small shelter with wind screaming outside and snow piling against the walls, he was grateful for every precaution. The structure held firm against the assault, barely creaking even when the strongest gusts hit. The roof he and Hazel had built did not leak a single drop. The walls, chinked carefully with mud and moss, kept out the cutting wind. Inside, a small fire burned in the makeshift hearth they had constructed from river stones, filling the space with warmth and flickering light. Hazel sat near the fire, mending one of her dresses by firelight. Her hands had healed enough to hold a needle, though Noshi noticed she still moved carefully, favoring the worst of the injuries. She had been quiet since the storm began, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. Noshi did not press her to talk. The silence between them had become comfortable over the past days, no longer weighted with unspoken accusations. Outside, something crashed against the wall. Probably a branch torn loose from one of the cottonwoods. The whole shelter shuddered but held. Hazel looked up sharply, needle pausing mid-stitch. "It will hold," Noshi said, answering the question in her eyes. "We built it strong." She nodded and returned to her sewing, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. This was her first major storm in the new shelter, the first real test of whether their work would be enough. Trust was earned slowly, even trust in walls and rafters. The storm raged for 2 full days. During that time, they existed in a small bubble of warmth and firelight, while outside the world disappeared into white chaos. They took turns feeding the fire, melting snow for water, preparing simple meals from their limited supplies. They talked sometimes about small things, safe things. The weather. The quality of the firewood. Plans for improvements to the shelter once spring came, but they also sat in silence often, each lost in their own thoughts. Noshi found himself watching Hazel when she was not looking, noticing things he had been too grief-stricken to see before. The way she bit her lower lip when concentrating. The small scar on her left hand from some old burn. The strength in her despite her small frame. A core of iron wrapped in flesh that looked deceptively fragile. On the second night of the storm, as wind howled and snow piled higher against the walls, Hazel finally broke the comfortable silence with a question that had clearly been building. "What will you do when spring comes?" Noshi looked up from the piece of leather he had been working into a new boot sole. "What do you mean?" "I mean, will you leave again? Drift back to the trading posts and the trap lines? Or will you stay?" The question was asked casually, but Noshi heard the weight beneath it. This was not idle curiosity. This was Hazel trying to understand if she was building a future alone or with someone beside her. "I have not thought that far ahead," he admitted. "I have been focused on getting through the winter." "Well, think about it now," Hazel said, setting down her sewing and looking at him directly. "Because I need to know. I need to know if you are here because of guilt over Matthew, because of some obligation you feel you must fulfill, or if you are here because you actually want to be." Noshi set down the leather and boot sole, giving her his full attention. This conversation mattered, would shape everything that came after. He needed to get it right. "When I first came back," he said slowly, choosing words carefully, "it was because of guilt. Because Matthew asked me to look after you, and I had failed. But these past days, building the shelter, facing down Dutch and his men. Sitting here with you while the storm tries to tear the world apart, I have realized something. What? Hazel asked, her voice barely audible over the wind. That I am not staying for Matthew anymore, no, she said. I am staying for you. For us. Because somewhere between hammering nails and fighting town hypocrites, I started to want a future again. And I want it to be here. Hazel was very still, her eyes searching his face for any sign of deception or uncertainty. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her because slowly, carefully, she smiled. It was a small smile, tentative and fragile as new ice, but it was real, good, she said simply. Because I do not want to do this alone. You will not have to, no, she promised. The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility and the kind of honesty that only comes when people have nothing left to hide behind. Then Hazel picked up her sewing again, and Noshi returned to his leatherwork, but something fundamental had shifted. They were no longer two people thrown together by tragedy and necessity. They were choosing each other, deliberately, and with full knowledge of what that choice would cost. The storm finally broke on the third morning. Noshi woke to silence, the sudden absence of wind so profound it felt like pressure against his ears. He rose carefully, not wanting to wake Hazel, who still slept curled beneath her blankets near the fire. Moving to the door, he pushed it open and stepped out into a transformed world. Snow lay everywhere, pristine and blinding white in the early morning sun. It came up past his knees in places, sculpted into fantastic drifts by the wind. The sky above was a brilliant crystalline blue, so clear and cold it hurt to look at. The air was absolutely still, frozen into silence. Noshi stood there breathing in the sharp, clean scent of new snow, feeling the bite of cold on his face, and allowed himself a moment of simple gratitude. They had survived. The shelter had held. They had food and fire and each other. For now that was enough. A sound behind him made him turn. Hazel had emerged from the shelter, wrapped in the wool blanket, her hair loose around her shoulders. She stopped beside him, and together they surveyed the winter landscape. Beautiful, she said softly, and deadly, no, she added. We will need to check the supplies, make sure nothing got damaged. And I should hunt soon, while the tracks are fresh. Always practical, Hazel said. But there was warmth in her voice, not criticism. They spent the morning digging out, clearing snow from around the door and creating paths to the woodpile and the small lean-to where Noshi's horse sheltered. The animal had weathered the storm well, protected by the windbreak Noshi had constructed. He fed and watered the horse, checking for any signs of cold injury, and was relieved to find none. It was afternoon when they saw the smoke. A thin, dark column rising from the direction of town, too thick to be from a chimney, too sustained to be anything but deliberate. Noshi and Hazel stood together watching it, both understanding what it likely meant. They are burning something, Hazel said. Her voice tight. The question is what, Noshi replied, already moving toward his horse. And whose? You are going to investigate? Hazel asked, following him. I need to know what we are dealing with. If they are escalating, we need to be prepared. Then I am coming with you. Noshi started to argue, then saw the set of her jaw and thought better of it. Stay close to me, he said instead. And if there is trouble, you run. Do not argue, do not try to help, just run back here and bar the door. Hazel nodded, already moving to saddle Noshi's horse. They rode together, Hazel seated behind Noshi, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance. The horse moved carefully through the deep snow, picking its way along the trail that led toward town. As they drew closer, the smoke grew thicker, and Noshi began to smell burning wood and something else, something chemical and harsh. They crested a rise and saw it. The old Crowley homestead, the place where Matthew had grown up, where Noshi had gathered the lumber to build Hazel's shelter, was burning. Flames consumed the structure, sending black smoke boiling into the clear sky. And standing watching it burn were Dutch Morrison and a half-dozen other men from town. Noshi reined in the horse, his hand moving instinctively toward the rifle in its saddle scabbard. Hazel's arms tightened around his waist, her breath catching. Dutch turned at the sound of hoofbeats and smiled. That same cold, venomous smile from before, Mrs. Crowley, he called out, his voice carrying across the snow. Come to watch the show? What have you done? Hazel demanded, her voice shaking with rage and grief. That was Matthew's home. His father's home was being the operative word, Dutch said. Abandoned property is a danger to the community. Fire hazard. We decided to eliminate the risk. You had no right, Hazel said, sliding down from the horse and starting toward the burning structure. Noshi grabbed her arm, holding her back. That is exactly where you are wrong, Dutch said. As elected peacekeepers of this community, we have every right to deal with abandoned structures, especially when they are being used to shelter undesirables. Understanding hit Noshi like a fist. This was not about the homestead. This was a message. They were eliminating any resource he and Hazel might use, cutting off any refuge beyond the small shelter they had built. This was strategy, calculated and cruel. The lumber I took was mine by right, Noshi said, his voice deadly calm. Matthew would have wanted Hazel to have it. Matthew is dead, Carl Brenner spoke up from behind Dutch. And the dead do not get a say in how the living conduct their affairs. But we do, Frank Hutchins added, stepping forward. And we say that you have worn out what little welcome you had. It is time to move on, Indian. Leave Mrs. Crowley to make proper arrangements for her future. I am her proper arrangement, Noshi said flatly. The men exchanged glances, some laughing, others looking uncomfortable. Dutch's expression hardened. You think mighty highly of yourself, he said. A half-breed drifter with no land, no money, no prospects. What exactly do you bring to this arrangement, except trouble? He brings loyalty, Hazel said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. He brings honesty and hard work and the courage to stand beside me when every single one of you turned your backs. That is worth more than all your so-called respectability combined. Pretty speech, Dutch said. But words do not put food on the table or keep you warm in winter. We are offering you a way out, Mrs. Crowley. There's a widower in town, decent man, good provider. He has expressed interest in taking you as his wife. Give you a real home, real security. All you have to do is send your pet Savage away. The casual cruelty of it, the reduction of her grief and her choices to a transaction made Noshi's blood boil. But before he could speak, Hazel laughed. It was a harsh sound, bitter and sharp. Let me understand this, she said. You want me to abandon the man who came back to help me survive, who built me a home with his own hands, who stood beside me when I had nothing, and instead marry some stranger because you think it is more proper? Is that truly what you are suggesting? I am suggesting you think about your future, Dutch said. Winter is long. Your supplies will not last. And when you come crawling to town begging for help, you will find our charity has limits. Then it is fortunate I do not need your charity, Hazel said coldly. She turned to Noshi. We should go. There's nothing here worth saving. They mounted the horse together, Noshi keeping his eyes on the armed men until they were well clear. As they rode away, the homestead collapsed behind them in a shower of sparks and flame, taking with it the last physical connection to Matthew's childhood. Noshi felt the loss like a wound, but he also felt something else. Pride. Hazel had not wavered, had not been tempted by their offers or intimidated by their threats. They will come after us directly next, Hazel said quietly as they rode. Burning the homestead was just the beginning. I know, Noshi said. Which is why we need to be ready. That night they made plans. Noshi checked and cleaned his rifle, his pistol, the knives he carried. He showed Hazel how to load and fire the weapons, how to aim, how to control her breathing to steady her hands. She learned quickly, her natural intelligence and determination making up for lack of experience. "I do not want to shoot anyone," she said. Holding the rifle awkwardly, "Neither do I," no, she replied. "But if they come for us, if they try to hurt you or burn this shelter, I need to know you can defend yourself. Even if it is just long enough for me to get to you." Hazel nodded and raised the rifle again, sighting along the barrel at a mark Noshi had scratched on a distant tree. She squeezed the trigger carefully, and the shot cracked out across the frozen valley, echoing off the mountains. The bullet struck wide, but not by much. She was learning. They practiced until dark, until Hazel could load and fire smoothly, until her aim was good enough to hit what she aimed at more often than not. It was not perfect, but it might be enough. Might keep her alive if the worst happened. As they sat by the fire that night, cleaning the weapons and putting them within easy reach, Hazel spoke the fear that had been growing between them. "What if they do not just threaten?" she asked. "What if they actually come with torches? What if they try to drive us out by force?" Noshi was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. When he answered, his voice was steady but grim. "Then we fight," he said. "And we make them understand that we will not be moved. This is our home now, our land, and we defend it, even if it means killing." "Even then," Noshi said. "Though I hope it does not come to that. Most men lose their courage when they realize their target will shoot back. And if they do not lose their courage, then we make them regret finding it." Hazel reached across the space between them and took his hand. Hers was small in his, the bandages finally removed, new pink skin visible where the worst cuts had been. She squeezed gently. "I am glad you came back," she said softly. "I do not think I could face this alone. You would have found a way," Noshi said. "You are stronger than you know, maybe," Hazel said. "But I am grateful I do not have to test that theory." They sat together as the fire burned low, their hands clasped, while outside the winter night deepened, and somewhere in the darkness, men plotted violence. But inside the small shelter they had built together, there was warmth and light, and the kind of quiet determination that comes from having nothing left to lose and everything worth fighting for. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The town would escalate, would push harder, would try to break them through isolation or intimidation or outright force. But tonight they were together, and they were armed, and they were ready. And in the vast frozen wilderness of Montana Territory, that combination of preparation and partnership might just be enough to survive what was coming. Noshi looked at Hazel in the firelight, at the strength in her face and the steel in her eyes, and felt something shift in his chest. This was no longer about honoring Matthew's last request. This was no longer about guilt or obligation. This was about protecting something precious, something worth dying for if necessary. This was about love, though neither of them had spoken the word yet. The fire crackled between them, and outside the wind picked up again, carrying with it the promise of more snow, more cold, more hardship to come. But they had survived this much. They would survive what came next. Together. The attack came on the coldest night of the year, when the temperature dropped so low that spit froze before it hit the ground and breath turned to ice crystals in the air. Noshi had been expecting it for days, watching the horizon for signs of riders, sleeping with one ear always alert for the sound of approaching horses. When it finally came, it was not with the drama of torches and shouting, but with the quiet menace of men who believed themselves righteous. He woke to the smell of smoke, acrid and wrong, coming not from their hearth, but from outside. His eyes snapped open, and he was on his feet in seconds, grabbing his rifle and moving to the small window he had cut into the eastern wall. What he saw made his blood run cold. 6 men on horseback surrounded the shelter at a distance, dark shapes against the snow-covered ground. And in the hands of 3 of them, torches burned bright against the frozen darkness. They had not thrown them yet, were simply sitting there waiting, making their presence known. This was a siege, not a raid. Hazel, no, she said quietly, urgently. She was already awake, had been sleeping as lightly as he had, waiting for this moment. She rose and moved to his side, looking out the window at the men who had come to destroy them. How long have they been there? She whispered, not long. Minutes, maybe. They want us to see them, want us to be afraid. It is working, Hazel admitted, but her voice was steady. Her hands already reaching for the pistol they kept loaded near the door. A voice called out from the darkness, Dutch Morrison's voice. Loud and carrying in the frozen air. Mrs. Crowley, this is your final warning. Send out the Indian, and we will leave you in peace. Keep harboring him, and we will burn you out. You have until I count to 10 to decide. Noshi moved to the door, positioned himself where he could see out through the gap between door and frame. Hazel came to stand beside him, the pistol held properly now, finger alongside the trigger guard like he had taught her. 1. Dutch called out. What do we do? Hazel asked, looking at Noshi. We show them we are not afraid, Noshi said. He took a deep breath, then called out through the door. The only person who decides who stays in this house is Hazel Crowley. And she has made her choice clear, too, Dutch continued. Ignoring him, last chance Indian. Carl Brunner's voice joined in. Walk out now with your hands up, and we will let you leave territory. You got my word on that. The word of a man who burns homes in the night is worth less than snow, Noshi called back. 3, Noshi turned to Hazel. When I open this door, I need you to stay low, stay behind cover. If shooting starts, you aim for the horses, not the men. Bring down their mounts, and they cannot chase us if we need to run. I am not running, Hazel said fiercely. This is my home, our home, Noshi corrected. And we defend it together. 4. If I tell you to run, Noshi continued, his voice urgent, you do it. You go into the trees, follow the creek north to the Shoshone camp we passed on the way here. Tell them you are under my protection, show them this. He pulled a small beaded token from around his neck, a gift from his mother's brother years ago, a symbol recognized by the northern tribes. He pressed it into Hazel's hand. 5. I will not leave you, Hazel said, closing her fingers around the token but not putting it on. You will if I am dead, and you are alive, Noshi said bluntly. Promise me. 6. Hazel looked at him, tears forming in her eyes but not falling. I promise, she whispered. But it will not come to that. 7. Noshi moved to the door, rifle ready, and called out one more time. You do not want to do this, Dutch. There are 6 of you and 2 of us, but we are behind solid walls with clear lines of fire. You come at us, and some of you will die before you ever reach this door. Is that really worth it? Is your pride worth your life? There was a pause in the counting. Noshi heard low voices conferring, arguing. Someone was reconsidering, weighing the cost. For a moment he dared to hope that reason might prevail. Then Dutch's voice came back, harder than before. And Noshi knew the man's pride had won out over his sense. 8. Your tricks will not work, Indian. We know you are just one man with one rifle. You might get one of us, maybe 2 if you are lucky. But then we will burn you out, and you will die screaming. Is she worth that? Is one white woman worth dying for? Noshi looked at Hazel, at the firelight reflecting in her eyes, at the strength in her bearing despite her fear, at everything she represented, hope, future, a reason to believe that broken things could heal. And he knew his answer with absolute certainty. Yes, he called back simply. 9. Then you are a fool, Dutch said. And you will die a fool's death. Noshi raised his rifle, sighting on the man holding the nearest torch. Beside him, Hazel lifted the pistol, her hand steady now, all fear burned away by resolve. They stood together in the doorway of the home they had built, ready to defend it with everything they had. 10. The The word hung in the frozen air for one long breath. Then chaos erupted. The three men with torches spurred their horses forward, arms cocked to throw. Noshi fired, his shot taking the nearest horse in the shoulder. The animal screamed and went down, throwing its rider into the snow. The torch flew wild, landing harmlessly in a snowbank where it hissed and died. Hazel fired a second later, her shot missing the horse but striking close enough to make it rear and bolt. The second torch fell as the rider fought for control. 2 down, 1 to go. The third rider was smarter, had hung back until his companions committed. Now he came fast, arm already in motion, the torch spinning through the air toward the roof of the shelter. Noshi tracked him, fired, but the shot went wide as the rider ducked. The torch landed on the roof with a shower of sparks. The roof, Hazel gasped, but Noshi was already moving. Grabbing the bucket of snow they kept by the door and throwing it up onto the roof, where flames were starting to catch on the dry shingles. The fire hissed and smoked but did not go out entirely. Gunfire erupted from the other riders now. Bullets thudding into the walls of the shelter. One punching through the window and embedding in the far wall. Noshi pulled Hazel down as splinters flew. They crouched behind the thick walls, breathing hard. "We need to put out that fire," Hazel said, already moving toward more snow. "Not while they are shooting," Noshi said, pulling her back. He moved to the window, rifle ready, and fired at the muzzle flash from one of the riders. He heard a cry of pain, could not tell if he had hit man or horse, but the shooting from that direction stopped. The night dissolved into a nightmare of smoke and gunfire and shouting. The men circled the shelter, taking turns firing while others reloaded, trying to keep Noshi and Hazel pinned down while the fire above them grew. Noshi fired back whenever he had a clear shot, forcing the riders to keep their distance, but he could feel the situation deteriorating. The smoke was getting thicker, the fire spreading despite the snow and cold. "We cannot stay here," Hazel coughed, her eyes streaming from the smoke that was beginning to seep through the roof. "We cannot run either," Noshi replied. "They will cut us down the moment we step outside." Then a new sound cut through the chaos. Hoofbeats, many of them, coming fast from the north. Both sides stopped shooting, confusion rippling through the attackers. Through the smoke and darkness, a group of riders emerged, at least a dozen strong, moving with the kind of precision that spoke of warriors rather than townsmen. They were Shoshone, Noshi realized with a surge of hope he had not dared to feel. The northern camp he had told Hazel about, the people who would recognize his mother's token. But how had they known to come? The lead rider, a man Noshi recognized as a chief named Tall Bear, who had known his mother, raised his hand and the Shoshone riders formed a line between the shelter and the townsmen. He spoke in clear English, his voice carrying absolute authority. "You attack one who carries the protection of the people," Tall Bear said. "This is a grave insult. You will leave now, or you will answer for it." Dutch Morrison, still mounted, looked at the line of warriors and seemed to shrink in his saddle. Whatever courage he had found in numbers evaporated when faced with skilled fighters who would not hesitate to kill. He looked at the shelter, at the smoke rising from its roof, at Noshi and Hazel visible in the doorway, and his face twisted with frustrated rage. "This is not over," he spat. "You cannot hide behind savages forever." "I do not hide," Noshi called back. "And these are not savages. They are my mother's people, and they have more honor in one warrior than your entire town has combined." Tall Bear made a sharp gesture, and the Shoshone warriors moved forward, hands on weapons. The message was clear. Leave now or face the consequences. Dutch and his men turned their horses and rode into the darkness, their retreat anything but dignified. The moment they were gone, Noshi was climbing onto the roof, using snow to smother the remaining flames. Hazel helped from below, passing up more snow, and together they killed the fire before it could spread beyond the surface shingles. The damage was contained, repairable, not catastrophic. When the last ember was dead, Noshi climbed down to find Tall Bear dismounted and waiting. The old chief studied him with eyes that had seen too much but had somehow retained kindness. "Your mother would be proud of how you fought," Tall Bear said in Cheyenne. "Standing for what is right, protecting those who cannot protect themselves. How did you know to come?" Noshi asked in the same language. Tall Bear smiled slightly and gestured to one of the younger warriors. "Your woman sent word 3 days ago. Came to our camp alone, showed us the token, told us you might need help. She has courage, that one." Noshi turned to Hazel in shock. She stood in the doorway, soot-stained and exhausted, but smiling slightly at his expression. "You went to the Shoshone camp?" He asked in English. "Someone had to," Hazel said. "You said they would help if I showed them the token. I believed you. So when you went hunting 2 days ago, I rode north and asked for their protection. Told them we might need friends when the town decided to act. That was dangerous," Noshi said, but he could not keep the admiration out of his voice. "You could have gotten lost, frozen, killed by wolves. Or I could have saved our lives," Hazel pointed out. "Which is what happened," Tall Bear laughed, a deep rich sound. "She is fierce, this one. You should marry her before someone with more sense claims her." The words, meant lightly, landed with unexpected weight. Noshi and Hazel looked at each other across the space between them, and suddenly all the careful distance they had maintained, all the unspoken boundaries, seemed absurd. They had nearly died tonight, had stood together against men who wanted them destroyed, had built a home and defended it and survived through partnership and trust. "He is right," Noshi said quietly, his eyes never leaving Hazel's. "About the fierce part at least. And the rest?" Hazel asked, equally quiet. "I cannot offer you what the town wanted you to have," Noshi said, aware that Tall Bear and the other warriors were listening but not caring. "I have no money, no land except what you already own, no prospects beyond hunting and trapping. I am caught between two worlds and fully welcome in neither. But I can offer you honesty and loyalty and a partnership built on something real. Are you asking me to marry you?" Hazel said, her voice catching slightly. "I am saying that if you wanted to, I would count myself the most fortunate man in Montana territory," Noshi replied. Hazel crossed the space between them in 3 quick steps and took his hands in hers. They were both filthy, covered in soot and smoke and the grime of battle, but neither cared. "Then yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you. Not because I need protecting, and not because I am afraid to be alone, but because somewhere between building walls and fighting off bigots, I fell in love with you." The words hit Noshi like a physical blow, knocking loose something that had been locked tight in his chest since Matthew died. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and for the first time in nearly a year, he let himself feel something other than guilt and grief. He felt hope. He felt joy. He felt like maybe he deserved this, deserved her, deserved a future. Tall Bear cleared his throat politely. "The Shoshone can perform a marriage ceremony if you wish. We have a medicine woman who speaks the proper words. We would be honored," Noshi said, looking at Hazel for confirmation. She nodded, tears streaming down her face now. But they were happy tears, healing tears. The ceremony was performed there in the snow by firelight, with Tall Bear's medicine woman speaking words in Shoshone while Noshi translated for Hazel. They bound their hands together with a beaded cord, traditional among his mother's people, and spoke vows that promised partnership rather than ownership, mutual respect rather than subservience. When it was done and the cord was removed, Noshi and Hazel stood as husband and wife before witnesses who understood the true meaning of strength and survival. The Shoshone warriors congratulated them, offered to help repair the roof damage, and promised to keep watch over the valley to ensure Dutch and his men did not return. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink, Noshi and Hazel stood together outside the shelter they had built. The roof would need repairs, the walls could use reinforcement, but it had held through fire and bullets, and the worst that prejudice could throw at them. It stood as testament to what two people could build when they worked together. What now? Hazel asked, leaning against Noshi's shoulder. Now we live, Noshi said simply. We hunt and trap and survive the winter. Come spring we plant crops, maybe add a room to the house. We build a life together, one day at a time. What about the town? They will not just accept this. No, Noshi agreed. But they will learn to leave us alone. We have allies now, and we have proven we will fight for what is ours. That has to count for something. Hazel turned to look at the shelter, at the smoke damage on the roof and the bullet holes in the walls, and smiled. It is not much, she said. It is everything, Noshi corrected. It is home. Our home. Built with broken boards and bleeding hands and more determination than sense. And it is ours. He thought of Matthew then, allowed himself to remember his brother without the crushing weight of guilt. Matthew would have liked this, would have approved of Noshi and Hazel finding comfort and strength in each other. Would have wanted them to be happy, to build something lasting from the ashes of tragedy. Thank you, Noshi said quietly, speaking to a brother who could no longer hear but perhaps could somehow know. For giving me a reason to come back. For trusting me with her. I will take care of her. I promise. Hazel heard the words and understood who they were meant for. She squeezed his hand gently. He would be happy for us, she said. I know he would. I believe that too, Noshi said. They stood together as the sun climbed higher, warming the frozen land by small degrees. The shelter behind them bore the scars of battle but stood firm, a symbol of resilience and the power of two people refusing to be broken by loss or hatred or fear. Inside was warmth and safety. Outside was a hard land that demanded everything from those who tried to survive in it, but they had each other now. Had built something real from scraps and determination. Had survived when everyone expected them to fail. And as the morning light spread across the valley, touching everything with gold, Noshi allowed himself to believe in something he had thought lost forever, the possibility of happiness. The promise of tomorrow. The quiet certainty that came from knowing you were exactly where you belonged, with exactly who you were meant to be with. Building a future one board, one nail, one moment of courage at a time. In the vast frozen wilderness of Montana Territory, a small shelter stood against the wind. Inside it, two people who had found each other in grief and chosen each other in love began the slow, beautiful work of healing. The scars would remain, would always be part of their story. But scars were proof of survival, evidence of battles fought and won. And this battle, the most important one, the fight for a future built on their own terms, was only just beginning. 1 year later, winter. 1882. The first snow of the season fell gently on the valley. Soft flakes drifting down like whispered promises. Noshi stood in the doorway of what could no longer be called a mere shelter, watching the white powder accumulate on ground that had seen so much change in 12 short months. Behind him, the structure that had begun as a desperate construction of salvaged boards and sheer determination had transformed into something substantial. Something permanent. The original 4 walls still stood. But they had been reinforced, chinked properly with lime mortar instead of mud and moss. A second room had been added in the spring, expanding the living space to include a separate sleeping area. The roof, repaired after the attack, now boasted a proper chimney made of river stone, and smoke curled from it in lazy spirals, carrying the scent of pine and cooking meat. A small barn stood 20 yards to the west, housing Noshi's paint horse and the 2 mules they had acquired for plowing. A chicken coop, built in summer, sat beyond that, the hens safely tucked away from the cold. This was no longer survival. This was a homestead. Noshi heard movement behind him and turned to see Hazel emerging from the bedroom. Wrapped in a heavy woolen shawl he had traded 3 prime beaver pelts for at the autumn rendezvous. She moved carefully, one hand resting on her swollen belly, 6 months pregnant with their first child. The baby was due in spring, when the world would be green again and life returning to the frozen land. "You will let all the warmth out," she said, but her tone was gentle teasing. This had become their morning routine, Noshi watching the sunrise while Hazel pretended to scold him for it. "Just checking the weather," he replied, stepping back inside and closing the door against the cold. "Storm coming, but not for a few days yet. We have time to finish the preparations." Hazel moved to the table, lowering herself carefully into the chair Noshi had built with extra padding for her comfort. The table itself was new, constructed over the summer from good pine, with 4 matching chairs. Real furniture, the kind that spoke of people planning to stay. To build a life that extended beyond mere survival. Noshi poured hot water from the kettle hanging over the fire and prepared tea. The imported kind that cost too much but that Hazel craved during her pregnancy. She accepted the cup with a grateful smile, wrapping her hands around it for warmth. "The Shoshone camp sent word yesterday," Noshi said, settling into his own chair. "Tall Bear wants to know if we need anything before the heavy snows come." "We should send something in return," Hazel said. "The smoked venison turned out well. And I finished that beadwork on the doeskin dress." The relationship with the Shoshone had deepened over the past year, built on mutual respect and the memory of that night when Tall Bear's warriors had stood between them and destruction. The tribe had become their primary community, more family than the people in town who still crossed the street to avoid them. A knock at the door interrupted their quiet morning. Noshi rose immediately, hand moving instinctively toward the rifle that still leaned near the entrance. But when he opened the door, he found not enemies but a familiar face. Young Tom Fletcher, barely 16, who worked odd jobs in town. "Mr. Crowley," the boy said, using the name Noshi had adopted after the marriage. "Sorry to bother you so early, but Doc Brennan sent me. Asked if you could come to town." Noshi's guard went up immediately. "Why?" "There has been an accident at the lumber mill. 3 men hurt bad, 1 might not make it. Doc remembered you have skill with healing, your mother's medicine. He is asking for help." Noshi glanced back at Hazel, who had risen carefully and come to stand behind him. Her expression was wary. The town had not apologized for the attack, had not acknowledged wrongdoing. Going back felt like walking into a trap. "Tell the doctor I will come," Hazel said before Noshi could refuse. "But Noshi does not go alone." "I go with him." "Hazel, you should not be riding in your condition," Noshi protested. "Then we take the wagon," she said firmly. "But we go together. Always together." The wagon ride to town took an hour, the mules plodding steadily through the light snow. Hazel sat beside Noshi on the bench seat, wrapped in furs, her rifle across her lap. They had learned to go nowhere unarmed. Doc Brennan met them at the door, his face lined with exhaustion and relief. "Thank God," he said simply. "I have done what I can, but one of them, Jim Harris, he has a puncture wound that is beyond my skill. Infection is setting in." Noshi hesitated on the threshold, memories flooding back. The threats, the fire, the hatred in Dutch Morrison's eyes. But Hazel's hand found his, squeezed gently, and he remembered who he was now. Not the guilt-ridden drifter who had run from responsibility, but a healer, a husband, a man who did what was right regardless of past wrongs. "Show me," he said. The clinic was crowded with injured men and worried families. Noshi recognized several faces, people who had stood silent while Dutch Morrison threatened to burn them out. But he also saw fear and pain that transcended old conflicts. His mother had taught him that healing was sacred, that medicine served the wounded regardless of who they were. Jim Harris lay on a cot in the back room, unconscious and burning with fever. The wound in his side was ugly, a deep puncture from mill equipment. Doc Brennan had cleaned and stitched it, but infection had taken hold. The flesh angry red and beginning to streak. "I need boiling water, clean cloth," And a sharp knife heated red hot, Noshi said. Also whiskey, the strongest you have, and honey if you can find it. Doc Brennan moved quickly while Noshi opened the leather pouch he always carried. Selecting dried herbs, roots, powders ground from bark and leaves. He mixed a poultice that would draw out infection and promote healing. The procedure took 2 hours. Noshi reopened the wound, cleaned out the infected tissue, cauterized what needed cauterizing. Jim Harris woke screaming halfway through and had to be held down by 3 men while Noshi worked. Through it all, Hazel stood nearby, handing him tools and supplies without being asked. When it was finished and Jim Harris lay breathing easier, his fever already beginning to drop, Noshi washed his hands and stepped back. The crisis was over. The room had filled with people during the procedure. Among them, Noshi spotted Dutch Morrison standing near the back, his face unreadable. Their eyes met across the crowded room. Doc Brennan addressed the crowd. "This man would be dead without Noshi Crowley's skill," he said bluntly. "I want that known and remembered. Whatever has passed between this town and the Crowleys, today they came when called and saved a life." Jim Harris's wife pushed through the crowd, her face streaked with tears. She approached Noshi directly and spoke clearly so everyone could hear. "Thank you," she said. "You did not have to come, not after how we treated you. But you came anyway and you saved my husband. I will not forget that." She took Noshi's hand in both of hers, an acknowledgement and an apology wrapped into a simple gesture. Others began to murmur, some nodding agreement. The wall of hostility had cracked. Dutch Morrison moved through the crowd then, stopping directly in front of Noshi. The 2 men faced each other, the history between them heavy as stone. Then Dutch spoke, his voice gruff but not unkind. "My cousin owes you his life," he said. "That is a debt I acknowledge. What happened before, what I did, that was wrong. I will not apologize because words are cheap. But I will say this, you and your wife have earned the right to live in peace. Anyone who says otherwise will answer to me. It was not friendship being offered. It was not even full acceptance. But it was a truce." Noshi nodded slowly. "All I ever wanted was to live quietly and be left alone," he said. "Then you will have it," Dutch said. He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Noshi took it. The handshake was brief, formal, but witnessed by everyone present. The ride home was quiet, both lost in thought. The confrontation they had braced for had not come. Instead, they had found something unexpected. A pathway toward, if not acceptance then, at least tolerance. "Do you think it will last?" Hazel asked as their homestead came into view. "I do not know," Noshi admitted. People change slowly. But today was a start. That night, lying in their bed with Hazel's head resting on his shoulder and his hand on her swollen belly, feeling the baby move, Noshi thought about the journey that had brought them here. From guilt and grief to partnership and love. From a desperate shelter built with bleeding hands to a real home with a future growing inside it. "I think Matthew would be happy," Hazel said softly. "Seeing what we have built, knowing his brother found a way to live again." "I hope so," Noshi replied. "I like to think he is watching somehow, seeing that we did not let his death be meaningless. That we took the pain and built something good from it." The baby kicked hard against his hand, and they both laughed quietly in the darkness. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the valley in white silence. But inside there was warmth and light, and the quiet certainty of people who had fought for their place in the world and won. Spring would come eventually. The baby would be born. Crops would be planted. Life would continue in all its beautiful complexity. There would be more struggles, more challenges to face. But they would face them together, with courage, with determination, with the kind of love that grew not from easy circumstances, but from choosing each other every day, despite the cost. The kind of love that built homes from scraps and hope from ashes. In the morning, Noshi would take the beaded dress to Tall Bear's camp. He would hunt and check the trap lines and do the 100 small tasks that winter demanded. Hazel would tend the chickens and work on sewing clothes for the baby and rest when the weight of carrying new life became too much. But tonight, wrapped in warmth and each other, they simply held on to the peace they had earned, to the home they had built, to the future they had fought for and won more than enough. It was everything.
Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.